Hello, this is the second part of the Wing Library Management tutorial. In this part, I will walk you through the edit page with all its library elements, which are the snaps, the snips, the clips, the f-axis and the channels. The show management as well as the mixer part I will talk about in one of the next parts. What you see here on the left page is the Windows folder you have selected, which will contain or contains all those library elements here. So with this arrow up, you can go to a certain folder, and that is then your base folder, from which you can dig into the detail and can go back. When you have once selected such a base folder, then you cannot go further to the parents. So in this case, when I have here the Wing Edit layer selected, then there is no back arrow, but I can go forward and can go backwards up to this base folder that you have selected. So when we open now up the Windows Explorer with that folder, then you see that here I have a snap file, and that's exactly the content I see here. When you have other files in this, like a text document, then of course this is not shown here in Wing Edit or on the Edit library page. All the saves you make here will be stored in that folder for now. You can change the folder, and from that moment on, all the saves will occur in that folder. So you can go and delete, rename the items, or add a new folder, which is then exactly the same like if you would have edited directly via the Windows Explorer, just that you do not have to leave it. Now we come to the right side and have a look to these different library elements, the snaps, the snips, the clips, the f-axis and the channels. What is the main difference between snap and snip? A snap saves always all parameters, but only loads and updates those that are selected via the edit scope. The snip is saving only those parameters you're selecting by add items or record, and is loading then those parameters. So in the snip, there are not all parameters included, just the selected ones. First, to make a new save, and we call it snap all. And then we go to the snip, we say add item, select the complete scope and say add and save it as snip all. So now we open both files because we want to compare it. And the snip file. Okay, what we do now is we are using the compare shortcuts. That's the plugin I guided you through in the first part to install it with Notepad++. Here you'll find how to set the first file to be compared with Alt+Net Ctrl+1, and the second is Alt+Net Ctrl+C. That's what we do now. Alt+Net Ctrl+1, Alt+Net Ctrl+C. With Alt+Net 0 we close that, and with Alt+Net page up, page down, you can navigate through the changes. As explained in the first part, the snap file is always saving the main Alt+Net status and the global input select override. And the snip does not have those parameters. Then we have the repeat, and we have the USB recording settings. Then we go further. This SPIDX I will consider as a variable which, to my understanding, does not play any role. All the layers have this SPIDX. Then in the user channel we have the user mode and the C mode. That's something for the full size, I believe. So I don't know exactly what that is. That is not occurring in the snip file. And then we have the C user 1, 2, 3. I believe that's as well something for the console, for the full-size console. Then the status of the GPIO switches, and Then the globals, which are called saved here. And then the OSC log parameters. Those are the only differences here between the snapshot file and the Snipplet file. I'm deleting again those two files, those two library elements. Clips don't have any parameters. They're only there that you can select here a WAV file and play it through your PC audio or laptop audio. And when you copy then that folder to the console, then it's played through the PA. But you will see that plays especially a role when we come in the next part to the show control. The F-axis, they're saving all the parameters for an effect, and the channel will save all the channel parameters plus the effect parameters when this channel has one of those two or both effects loaded. And now we come to the functionality of the snaps. So please have also a look at the part 1 where I explain in detail what the scope of a snapshot is, because that is essential to work with scopes here. So I want to show you just some numbers that you understand what we are dealing here with. So maybe only the yellow line is the real important one. So I did some computation. So in total we have about 30,000 parameters, but there are also a lot of duplicates like the EQ settings of each channel and so on. So when we speak about the unique parameters, we have about a number of 3,000 unique parameters. Maybe it's a little bit less, but it's not so easy to give a number. It's just for you that you get an idea about the size of parameters which get managed by those snapshots. And that's also the reason why you have the scope. So in the first part you have seen that I created this base snapshot because I saved it with scope. So I will overwrite that now and just make a save with it. And then I'm opening up the snapshot with Notepad++, and you will see there is no scope section there. And I will show you when I put the scope section in. So I select all the scope and make a save. So now you have the scope section down here. Pluses means everything is selected. So it does not matter if you have a snapshot saved with save only or with save plus scope and you select the complete scope. It's the same. It means all the parameters which are part of the scope will get loaded. So what does that mean? This means when you load that snapshot, then all those parameters fitting that scope will get loaded into the mixer. You can modify the scope here on the edit scope page. Then less parameters will get loaded in the mixer, but be aware of that the snapshot contains all the parameters. And by the way, don't wonder that the line number is higher than those 30,000 I've shown to you, because parameters are only the single parameters here, but not the structural elements. So all these structure elements here, OSC, MIDI, DAW, all the structural parameters are not counted as parameter. So let's quickly go through the buttons here. You have the Save button, which saves all parameters and has no scope section, which means it's the complete scope. You have the Save plus Scope, so it will save all parameters, but you can set a scope, which is then later used to load only those parameters which are part of the scope, but all parameters got saved. When you make an update, only those parameters get updated which are part of the edit scope. The partial update, you can choose other parameter than set in edit scope. Load will always load the parameters which are part of the scope you find in edit scope. Partial load, you can select any other parameters to be loaded. And restore will ignore the scope and will make a count of init and will also load those parameters which are not part of the scope but are always saved. I walk you through making a lot of examples. So I have here the base snapshot which I created in part 1. And I'm now saving that again. Under new name, we'll start playing around with this. Let's go now, and we are updating the name, channel 5 name, and give it a color and whatever sign. And we mute it, and we are moving up the fader. So what scope do I have? I have here now the complete scope selected. So I click on none, so no scope is selected, and I say channel 5, and I only select mute. So in this case, only, when I click update, only channel 5 mute will be updated. Let's check that. And I'm opening the updated snapshot, and I go to channel 5. So you see, their name is empty, even so that I have given a name. The fader is minus 144, which means it's absolute at the bottom. But the mute is true, because the scope was set to channel 5 mute. That is the reason why I have that. When I have now all, and I say update, and I'm going to the snap file again, then and open up channel 5. Then you see channel 5 name, the fader has that value, and the mute is still mute. Yeah? Now I'm changing the value of fader 7 and I'm muting it, and I say update. Just consider the scope is still channel 5 with all content, and I've changed channel 7 and I made an update. Let's go to channel 7. So nothing happened. Mute is false, the fader is at minimum. That's the reason, because update is only updating the elements which are part of the scope. But when I make now a partial update, and I'm selecting none, channel 7, and I say all here, and I have updated that now. And I go again to channel number 7. You see here, the fader is set and the mute is true. With the partial update, you just can update specific elements with a different scope, but the edit scope still stays the same. So the partial update is not changing the edit scope. So the next time you make a load, and when we now move all the faders down, and we unmute it, and I make a load, only channel number 5 gets loaded, because the scope is only for channel number 5. When I'm adding channel 7 and I make a load, then channel 7 is loaded as well. When I'm now undoing that last change and I remove again the channel number 7 and I make a load, or maybe I'm first setting that as to infinitive again, and I'm loading that now, you see now channel number 5 got loaded. But what you can do then, the same like with partial update, you can make a partial load, and in this case it's channel 7 mute. Now only the mute status was loaded of channel 7. So partial load is not touching the scope, partial update is not touching the scope, and it's kind of one-time action, and this time I can load other parameters into the mixer or update other parameters from the mixer into the file. And then I have the restore button. So with restore, it is like an init. It takes all the parameters which are in the snapshot file and it loads it in the mixer. And you know from part 1 that in the snapshot files there was a parameter which are not part of the scope, and they get only restored or loaded when you click restore. So I click restore. Now all the parameters got restored independent of the scope, because the scope is still channel 5, but restore is loading all the parameters now. Let's talk about the global. So what I can do, you see I have here edit scope, and let's go and activate again channel 7. So when I load this, or I'm resetting those first just to see the change. So now channel 7 gets loaded. With the global, I can say on this element level without specifying a scope. So on that level I can say channel 7 never should get loaded. So when I do this, and I have now the channel 7 again reset, but channel 7 is part of the scope, and I make a load. Channel 7 is not loaded because it's part of the global. Just when I take that out and I make a load, then channel 7 is loaded again. So when I'm now removing that and I activate channel 7 again, but I make a restore now here, to see I have now channel 7 not being part of the scope. I make a restore, channel 7 gets restored to the value, and the global setting gets reset, because the global setting, and let's go to that. That's maybe an important thing. You see the global setting looks similar to the scope setting, except that there's no contents box and no main sense and no bus sense. Saves are one of those values which do not have a scope. There is no element here which is addressing the globals. So what I did before, I was setting channel 7 to be a save, to be a global save, so that never the channel 7 gets loaded. By the way, that's just a little thing that I need to click cancel, but ideally would like to have an update button so that this gets saved in the snap file, but it is not. So what happens is I need to make a resave. I cannot make an update. Update does not, even so that I have set that, update does not set the save. So the channel area has no X in here. What you need to do is you need to make a save. So when I make a save, which is the same like I would make a new snapshot, and now you go to the saves area, you see here the plus, because that is marking the channel 7. When now I make a restore, you see that the save is kept, the save is not reset because it's part of the snapshot. So everything from the snapshot gets loaded, which is also channel 7 here. So I can remove it, I make a restore, and you see it's there again, because all parameters which are in the snap file will be loaded when you click restore. That is as well true for the globals, for the saves. Now there's something special with the partial load in combination with globals. So when I go to the partial load page, you immediately will see here that the channel 7 is in a kind of red background color. And what that means is that when you now partial load that snapshot, then it will not load channel 7. So you can turn that here off in the right lower corner of that panel. You have the no global button. So when you click on that, you see channel 7 turns blue again, because that means now that you disable the globals, and now you would load all channels into the mixer. So that's something you will see later then when we have the snips, and we have here partial load as well. It works exactly the same. So now we come to the snips. So before I go through the buttons, it's important that you understand the substantial difference between a snap and a snip. A snap saves always all parameters and loads only those parameters which you have specified via the scope, and as well loads those parameters you have specified via the scope. A snip saves only those parameters which you either have added by the addItem function, or you have recorded via the record function. That is the substantial difference here. Here on the right side, I'm mocking up the parameter buffer. So there's a parameter buffer for the snip files, which does not exist, of course, for the snap files. So for the snip files, you must add parameters to this buffer so that you can save them. And the number of parameters in this buffer are shown here in the parameter display. So let's do that now. Especially, I like it very much to use the addItem functions. I know that most people know the Snips, that they are used for the record function where you can record small changes on the mixer, but I really prefer very much the add items function of the Snip. So that I can better explain you what those buttons here do, I must create the first snip. And since I will later do a comparison between the snip parameters and the snap parameters, I now make a snip file which contains all the parameters. So I say add items, all. So I selected the complete scope, and by that all the parameters that can be saved via a snip on the mixer, and I'm adding that. And you see in this case I have 28,154 parameters. I will later explain you why there is not the number 30,000 that I have mentioned before. So those 28,154 parameters are now added to the parameter buffer on the right mockup. What I can do with that, I can save it. So I'm saving that. I call it snip all. And here we are. I have now a snip file with the 28,154 parameters. And I quickly go into that. So I have this snip all snip and have a look to that. So you see it looks very similar to the snap file. Again, when I do the comparison, you will see there are certain parameters missing in the snip file compared to the snap file, but you're finding all the informations here about channels, auxes, buses, and so on. Save, we spoke about save, always saves the parameters which are in the parameter buffer. Update. Update has nothing to do with the parameter buffer. Update takes the parameters which are in the snip file, and exactly those parameters will get updated. Let's make an example for that. And for that example, I say clear all. Clear all means I am emptying the parameter buffer. Now there are no parameters in the buffer. That is also the reason why the save is not available now. So I'm saying add items, channel 5, and I only want to have the channel 5 fader value. You see, I have one parameter. Now I have channel 5 with this one parameter in the parameter buffer. And when I say save, then it's channel 5 fader. So it doesn't matter what changes I do here. It does not matter what is contained in my parameter buffer. When I now click update, the content in the parameter buffer is irrelevant. It will update the parameters of the snip file, which in this case is the fader value of fader 5. So let's go and do that here. I'm changing the faders and the mute whatsoever. I have a huge parameter buffer here loaded with a lot of parameters. I say update, and after the update you see one parameter. So at the same time I said update, it has moved the parameter of the snip file into the buffer. So now let's have a look to the channel 5 fader. Here we are. So it's exactly as I said. Channel 5 fader is the only parameter, and because of that, that's the only parameter that got updated. So it's not like when you make add items and you're adding now channel 6 fader, add, it says 2 parameters, but only for the save. But when you make an update, it's not updating the selected snip file here to be that the second parameter gets added now. No, it just will update the parameters which are part of the snip file you have selected when you click update. That's very essential that you understand that. Loading back. So when I make a load, all parameters of the snip file will get loaded. So there's no such thing like for the snap files with the edit scope, because again, in the snap file there are all parameters are contained, and now we need to specify which of those parameters should be loaded or saved. In the snip file, I anyhow have only the parameters contained that I want to have in there. So that's the reason why I don't need to specify scope. I just say load. That's it. So you don't have a kind of edit scope here, you don't need it. The scope is represented by the content in the snip file. When I now reset channel 5 and 7, and I select channel 5 fader, and I say load, you see that only channel 5 got loaded, and it's only the fader that got loaded because that's what we have saved there. So when I go to snip all, because I created that when I started with the explanation for the snips, I can now make a partial load. I could load channel 5 and channel 7, fader in mute. Then I say no global. You see the channel 7 turns blue again. I say load, and here we are. I have reset now the values and the mute of channel 5 and channel 7. So that is how the partial load works. The load again is always taking the globals in consideration. That's so when I'm now say load here, you see only the channel 5 was loaded and not the channel 7, because channel 7 is set on the globals panel, and I don't have a chance to disable it like for the partial load. So when you want to load something that is set in the globals to be not loaded, but this time you want to load it, you could either go and turn it off in the globals, load it and turn the globals on, or you make a partial load, select all, and have the no global turned on, and then you load it. Then you can't forget to turn the globals again on. I already have shown you the add items method, so that's how you get the parameter buffer filled, so that the buffer is ready for a save. Now you also can use the remove item function. In this case, I do not know anymore what I have put into there. So if I want to know what's in there, then I need to make a save, and I need to make a save with question mark, because now I know what is in the buffer. You see question mark I cannot use, so this is then the question mark, and that's a snip for that. And there we see what we have: channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, channel 4. We have the in selection, the connection selection, and the customization selection, and the text selection, as much as you see here. What do I do in case I want to take channel 1 out of that? I can use now the remove items method. You see still the parameter buffer is loaded. I say remove items here. Channel number 1, I take the customization, the text, the connection. Now this got reduced. Now it's again important. When I say update, it does not care about the buffer. It will update all the parameters which are part of the selected snip. So the only thing I can do is I can make a save. That's the question mark updated. The parameter entries for channel 1 are not anymore part of that file. We removed it by the remove items function. You also can add parameters to the snip, and that's what most people anyhow know. What I'm showing you here is the record function. Record function means that whatever changes I make, they get recorded and get added to the current parameter buffer. So when I save this now, this is updated plus record. So I'm opening that up now, and I'm looking into the file. You see I have the mute for channel 10, 11, and 12. So when I'm clearing that out, when we are with the record function, then there's the recording focus. That is the only panel where you can define a scope for the snips, so you can reduce the parameters that will get recorded. I only want to record changes to the 40 channels, and I only want to record fader and mute changes. In this case, the record focus turns blue, and now I click record. I'm undoing the channel 10, 11, and 12 mutes. I got 3 parameters in the buffer now. And then I'm doing something else. I'm going and change for the channel 6 the name. Did not record that name change. I go to channel 9 and I'm changing the equalizer. And you see I have no parameters being recorded because they are not part of the recording focus. So I turn that on again. So I believe that's all about the record. And I clear that all. So we have gone to the save. Save saves all parameters of the parameter buffer. Update updates all the parameters which are part of the selected snip file you're going to update. Load loads always all the parameters which are in the snip file, considering the globals. Record records all the changes you make, respecting the recording focus you have set. Add items are adding parameters to the parameter buffer. Remove items, removing parameters from the parameter buffer. Clear all clears the parameter buffer. And then there's only one button left, which is the load focus button. So there are only two ways that you can get parameters from an existing snip to the parameter buffer because you want to modify it. You must make either an update. So I'm updating now the channel 5 fader value in here because that's the only parameter which is in that snip file, and I make update. So now the channel 5 fader value got updated. Or what else could you do? That is why you have here the load focus button. They also could have called it load parameters button. I go to this question mark and say load focus. Now we have the 60 parameters in here. They're in the buffer now. I can now modify them by add items and remove items. Or I go to the question update. Then we have the 45 parameters of it. Or the question update plus record. We have this 48. Or the snip O. We have the 28,154 parameters in here. So that's all about the snips. Let's come to the clips. So I'm first cleaning up all the work here. So I'm also deleting this here. I'm loading the base snapshot. And so we come to the clips now. For that purpose, I need to copy some songs into that folder, and I'm doing that using the Windows Explorer. I've prepared here 3 songs, and I'm copying that into the library management folder here. You see, when you make a change to a folder, it does not immediately show up here in Wing Edit. You first need to click this arrow up and then reselect this folder, and that's then when you will see those files. The clips. First thing I want to mention is that here you have a Windows player included, which means that you can scrub through the files. So when I'm playing that, I can go into scrubbing, which you cannot do on the player that is used on the Wing console. Clips play a role when you use the show management and you use a clip as a scene. When you're just here on the edit page, then what you can do is you can select songs, listen into them, and then I could take that folder and copy it to the mixer, or copy it on the USB stick and put it in the mixer. While when you play them here on your laptop or PC, then they are played through the laptop or PC audio. When you copy that folder to the mixer, then it's played through the PA. But again, they don't make very much use outside of the show management, at least to what I'm using them for. The f-axis. So it's quite simple. You see here all the effect racks, and you also see who is using a certain effect rack. I know now I want to save the reverb effect, which is currently used by channel 1. I click save. I call it FX1. Now we have the effect saved. Is as simple as that. When I click on that, you get another selection here. You can now choose into which effect rack you want to load it. I pick effect rack 14. I'm loading now the reverb effect into effect rack 14. You see, in this case I get an error message because I can't load it there, because it's a premium effect and 14 is just valid for standard effects. So I must pick now another one. Let's take effect 6. So I'm loading now the reverb into the effect rack number 6. The reverb is now loaded into the effect rack 6. You see there's a little other difference just from the usability. When you have no FX loaded and you go to FX, you only have here a single combo box to select the effect rack that you want to save. When you have selected an existing FX library element, then this is double used. It's used either to load that effect into that selected effect rack, or you're selecting another effect here and click Save and then call it FX14. That's then the effect 14 saved. So now we come to the last library element, which is the channel element. You see here I have a combo box. When I click on that, I get the list of all the 40 channels. There are 8 aux channels, there are 16 buses, there are 4 mains, and the 8 matrices. So what I'm doing now, I'm just now selecting channel 4 and I'm saving that. So when I click now on this channel 4, you see the scope which will be used when you load that element. And you have the combo box to select now the channel into which you want to load that channel configuration, which originally was saved from channel 4. So the functions you have available, you have again a save available. Save in this case means that you ignore the scope, you ignore the update scope, you ignore the load. You just select then another channel you want to save and save that. When you want to load it, then those parameters are relevant. I want to load the configuration that are saved from channel 4 now into channel 5. And I want to think about what scope I want to use for that. So the question is, do I want to use the fader values or maybe not? I want to have a new fader value, but I want to use the equalizer and the customization and so on. So fader value I'm deselecting and then I click load. And when you now look to channel 5, it has the same customization like channel 4, but the fader is kept at 0 because I have excluded it from the scope. So when I'm unselecting it and select it again, you see now that the fader is now again selected. When I'm changing the scope for a load, then this scope is not saved in that element. It's just used one time for that load. When I want to use this configuration more than one time, then I can also update the scope. So I can take the fader value, take it out, and then click Update Scope. So if I unselect it then and select it again, you see now that the fader scope is deselected. So let's have a look into that channel library element. I'm opening that up, channel 4. So here it is. You see there's all the channel data. And here on the top, you're seeing scope contents. And that's where in this library element, there's the scope content saved. And that's updated when you click on Update Scope. So what I want to show you as well, I go now to my channel number 1, from the base configuration. That is one having here the reverb effect. It has configured the auto mix function, but it's not turned on. I go now to the channel library element again, and I'm saving now channel 1. And when I click on that, what you see here is you have this up arrow, and you see then the parameters of the channel, when you saved it, can now be loaded as well into the new channel or maybe the same channel. So there's the same thing when you use the second effect slot. So when I'm using now the channel 3 and I'm putting an effect in both effect slots here, and I go to the library element and save the channel 3 and I click on it, then in this case you can select both effects if you want to load it into a certain effect rack or you want to not load it by selecting none. Then you can click this down arrow, then you close that effect section again. That's important when you load a channel library element. and you see this up arrow that you check the effects and you make a decision if you want to have that effect loaded, and if yes, then where you want to have it loaded. I am at the end of the library management tutorial part number 2, which was dealing about all those library elements. And in the next part, number 3, I will care about the show management. That's it.